So when we initially wanted to have this conversation, we were in the are we invading Iran? Are we not invading Iran? Oh, look, we're also invading Los Angeles. Talk to us about what's happening right now internationally as it pertains to American foreign policy, because I feel like a lot of times we are just lacking a foundational baseline. What should we know about the current state of affairs?
Yeah. First of all, I also want to really acknowledge the people who have been already impacted by this conflict. When we talk about these issues, it's really easy to gloss over the real human impacts. And to be transparent, like I have family in Iran, I have friends in Israel, and I have colleagues who have been working with the armed services or have family, colleagues who have family who are part of the armed services, and everyone has been terrified. Like I
Mm,
remember when President Trump went on Twitter and said everyone should just evacuate Tehran. And I had family in the country
right.
who were too old or like didn't have cars and couldn't go anywhere and like were trapped in apartment buildings hearing bombs drop around them.
My
And
God.
again, to everyone listening who either had family going through that, I just want to really acknowledge that because, again, it's really easy to talk about this in the headlines, but
Mm,
what President Trump did was incredibly reckless. And to give your listeners some context here, so these strikes we were told about the Iranian government's nuclear program. Now,
right.
it's rare that you have two different approaches side by side and you see what works and what doesn't. But this is one of those rare moments where we did have that. President Obama, along with other countries, helped negotiate a diplomatic approach called the JCPOA with the Iranian
Right.
government that successfully contained the program. And it wasn't based on handshakes and promises, it was based on independent verification mechanisms. There were inspectors that would go to Iran's facilities and make sure they were keeping their word. Now, Trump wins his first presidential term, rips up that agreement,
Sure did.
really damages the US's reputation when it comes to if we make a diplomatic agreement that we spend like many years forging with other countries, we can just walk away. So really damaged our credibility as a diplomatic partner. And
Mm,
now, many years later, we've seen Iran's nuclear program has accelerated. And like Prime Minister Netanyahu has been, pushing for this kind of military strikes for a long time. And we
yeah.
saw Trump go in. Now, what happened as a result of those strikes is we've learned that there's actually been very little damage to their nuclear program.
Yep.
And instead, what has happened was now inspectors have completely lost access to those sites. And the centrifuges and nuclear material has all gone underground. And
Wow.
the thing I also want to acknowledge, which a lot of people haven't said, is we're also seeing repression increase in Iran as a result of this. And like the Iranian
Mm,
government has always been horrible to begin with, but we're now also seeing them like further repress political dissidents under the guise of them being Israeli spies. So the outcomes of this have been truly horrific all around. And it's really clear that it's made everyone in the US, in Iran, and in Israel less safe.
mm. And so the idea that we have two competing visions of how to engage with a nation like Iran over an issue like nuclear power, to be able to have both of these examples in real time, one might think would sort of influence how decision making is happening at the upper echelons of American foreign policy circles. And yet it feels as though the fool is able to lead those who should be wiser in some ways, because it wasn't just Donald Trump who authorized this. We saw Pete Hegseth, who was gleeful about this. We have seen the newcomers to the American military establishment. I call them newcomers because they are utterly unqualified to sit in those spaces. These are some of the most mediocre at best occupants of these roles as they after having purged people who actually had expertise in this area. And I want to be clear, I'm not suggesting that American foreign policy was better prior to the current reality, because I think we can quibble about that, and we can see that regardless of the JCPOA's existence, America has a lot to learn when it comes to how to coexist in a way that doesn't require it to be in domination of other people. But what we are looking at right now, it feels as though American foreign policy on crack in a way that is the bad sort of crack. And so my concern is we are at the same time beating the drums of war. We are purging the military of black and brown soldiers, which means most of the people going off to fight are going to be young white men. They're also purging the military of women. And it feels as though the American foreign policy has really doubled, tripled, and quadrupled down into a white patriarchal view of who belongs in these spaces. And they're reviving, some might say it never left, the America dominance approach to things in ways that are not just dangerous for the conflict and potential conflict with Iran, but dangerous for America's intervention and engagement militarily in a whole host of nations. Your organization seeks to ensure that American foreign policy is more just. For those of us on the ground, it feels like that is almost an impossible task. What should we know about how we can be activating in this moment? Are there ways that we can influence American foreign policy? Because ultimately, once they run out of, and I hate to say it, once they run out of enough young white boys on those battlefields, they will reintegrate the military, because that's the reason they integrated the military in the first place. Talk to us about what foreign policy influence looks like today for those of us who don't want to see America continue the way it has.
So the first thing I'll say to your listeners is you have a lot more power than you think. And often when it comes to national security or foreign policy, you don't see people um, take part in the debates as much because often they think that I don't know enough to be able to say something. And I just want to say that's not true. So often these conversations have been framed as only the elites are allowed to play in this, or only national security experts. And then on the flip side, if you have a personal connection to a country, then you're too biased to have a
Right.
valid opinion, right?
Yep.
So really pushing back against that. If you're reading something and it does not make sense, so say like, the president is suggesting we should be bombing hurricanes to solve climate change. It's not because you lack the knowledge of how climate change or bombs work. It's because that policy makes no sense, right? So, and when it comes to like countries that are adversaries, like the Iranian government, people are always like, but like, how do you do diplomacy? And the thing to remember is diplomatic conversations are the most important when it comes to our adversaries,
Mm.
because that's how you stop wars. And so that's what I will remember. And again, I think often people underestimate the anti-war movement. And for all of the people listening who marched against the war in Iraq, like that legacy was really powerful. And because of that legacy, we saw Congress stand up and really push back against Donald Trump's war. So we had
Mm.
a bipartisan bill in the House. We saw the Senate moving. We saw people like Tucker Carlson and Marjorie Taylor Greene like talking about this. And again,
That was
that
wild.
would not have happened had it not been for the long history of the anti-war movement. So
Mm.
I would really encourage people to sit in that power and to remember that when it comes to this, we are right. The majority of people agree with us. Like when you think of we just celebrated July 4th, one of the few things that almost every American agrees with is we don't want more wars, right?
Mm.
So we're right. What we're saying is popular. Congress is more positioned to agree with us and take action than ever before. And now is the time for us to push for what genuinely makes us safe. And people know this, right? So, like, you see the effects of catastrophic climate change every day in a new headline. There is no path to bombing our way out of climate change. We all
Mm.
had to deal with the pandemic, and there is no path to bombing your way out of a pandemic. The biggest crises we face right now only have diplomatic solution. And part of why foreign policy is where it is two reasons. You have the same people who have consistently made bad decisions.
Mm,
They're continuing to make bad decisions and not being held accountable to them. And two, you have what is essentially people using typewriter thinking in a digital world.
wow.
And that's just not where we are anymore. And if people say, you know what, when it comes to the US government, your biggest job, your fundamental mandate is to help keep us safe. And if you are breaking that covenant, we will organize and we will push back against you.
Mm. And it feels as though the seeds that were a part of the anti-war movement during Iraq, they definitely came to fruition and really flowered in this most recent conversation. You mentioned some of the names of people who were against any further militarized engagement, and it was kind of surprising because these are often people who march in lockstep with the administration, and that was actually kind of encouraging to see people who about with whom I agree about nothing, but they were very much a part of this pushback against this idea that we should be going into war. So much so that the retreat, pun intended, the retreat that the Americans engaged in vis-a-vis Donald Trump was almost laughable. It was like, wait a minute, first you blew everything up, you destroyed it forever, and then oh wait, you actually missed in a couple occasions, and because you were so busy talking about what you were going to do, they were able to move what it is that they were trying to get in the first place. And you had this weird tension where many people who are from Iran were saying, we may not like the regime that is in charge right now, but we darn sure don't like the American regime coming in and trying to determine what should happen, and creating almost an opportunity for people to align in ways that perhaps they might not have before. And most of that, if not all of it, could have been avoided with diplomacy. But diplomacy went out the window once that deal was tossed away, because now we're trying to the Americans are trying to get Iran to agree to another deal. If I'm Iran, I'm thinking, why would I deal with y'all? We had a deal. You blew it up and then you bombed us. And so now it is also signaled to the rest of the world the best way to avoid Americans from coming after you is to, in fact, have a nuclear weapon, which is something I think a lot of people already believed. And this action just reaffirmed it again. But there are more of us than there are of them. There are more of us who want peace than there are of those who want war. And for people who are intrigued by this conversation and want to think more intently about this, either from an individual or a collective perspective, how do they support Win Without War, your organization? Are there resources that you all provide that they can learn from? And I hate that we only have like a minute or so before we get cut off because of the commercial break, but what's the best way for people to connect with and support your organization?
Go to winwithoutwar.org, sign up to join our newsletter. We will send you all the information you need so that you can take the most effective action on any given day on these issues.
I love that. Winwithoutwar.org. You all are doing some really important, vitally necessary work. And I'm just hopeful that we will continue to see the sort of call for diplomacy that I think is going to be the only thing that makes a difference. And yet, at the same time, I'm reminded when you have been a bully for so long, the idea of relying on tools other than your brute strength is a foreign one. And so there has to be some reconditioning and learning that the American general public is going to have to go through as well.